Greetings, fellow Fright Fiends. It's your buddy Boogeyman Ben here for another episode of Boogeyman Ben's Horror Zone, and this is the second part of my Exorcist Retrospective series, and this is going to be on the sequel to the original film. Now, this film would come out in 1977, so 4 years after the original. It was directed by John Boorman. It featured a couple of characters from the original film. It was called Exorcist II: The Heretic. Now, this film is one that I've only seen a couple of times. And even in that video that I talked, where I showcased in my last, my retrospective on the original Exorcist film, and I showed a clip from my first underrated horror film series where I talked about The Exorcist 3, I mentioned that I didn't like this film. I do not like Exorcist 2: The Heretic at all. I thought that was a horrible film. Because at the time that I saw The Exorcist and The Exorcist 3, as a teenager, I did rent The Exorcist 2. And even back in the 90s, I heard that this film was horrible. And I have a very small recollection of watching the film, but I remember not liking it. But I found it really cheap, and I'm a completist, and I thought I would give it another chance. Again, I found it for like $2.95, $3.95. So I said, it's worth picking it up and giving it a watch again. And, I'm really excited to actually talk about this film, because so many people rip on this film and hate this film, and it is a very different film when compared to the original. It's got so many things that are just different, and it's just a completely different vision than William Friedkin's original film. So I hope everyone looks forward to my take on The Exorcist 2. Please stay tuned. The plot of The Exorcist 2 focuses on two characters primarily, that of Regan MacNeil and Father Philip Lamont. Father Lamont has been ordered by the Cardinal to investigate the death of Father Merrin, who performed the exorcism on Regan 4 years prior. Meanwhile, Regan, who, under the care of Kitty Wynn, while her mother is on location filming, is also working with Dr. Gene Tuskin, because Regan currently suffers from repressed memories and bad dreams. The fear is that the demon that possessed Regan has returned. You have Richard Burton as Father Philip Lamont. You have Linda Blair as Regan MacNeil. You have Louise Fletcher as Dr. Gene Tuskin. You have Max von Sydow as Father Merrin. You have Kitty Wynn as Sharon Spencer. You have Paul Henreid as the Cardinal. And James Earl Jones as Older Kokomo. The movie was written by William Goodhart and John Boorman, who went uncredited as a writer, and he also directed the film. So, my thoughts on The Exorcist 2. Again, I've heard nothing but negative about this film. And again, I had seen the film, but I've seen this film even less than I had seen the original film. Again, I watched this when I was still a teenager. Hadn't seen it since. Watched it about a week and a half ago. And while it's not the greatest film ever made, I don't hate it as much as some people do. I do think it takes away a lot of the horror and dread from the original film. I know that John Boorman was not a fan of the original film, and it shows in this movie. There's not a lot of scares in this film. This film plays more like almost like a psychological drama than a horror film, or a sequel to a very well-known horror film. With the cast, I thought Linda Blair did a good job. There's scenes in it where it flashes back to what happened in the original film, scenes that we didn't see, which I actually thought was kind of interesting, because you never see, and I'll put spoilers in this, but if you haven't seen the original Exorcist, I'm going to talk about some of the outcome of that. But you never see Father Merrin, what happens to Father Merrin. You just see him dead at one point in the original film, and this film kind of plays into how Father Merrin died. So it flashes back to the exorcism, but Linda Blair hated the makeup so much in the original film that she actually did not do the shots in this. So they redid it with an extra playing Regan in the full makeup. And it took away from it for me, because I could tell it wasn't Linda Blair. It was good seeing Max von Sydow and finding out a little bit more about him. I had a little bit of a problem with Richard Burton, who I do admire as an actor. I loved him in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. I think that's a fantastic film, and he was terrific in it. But I didn't like him in this movie. I just didn't connect to his character. Again, you're coming from the original Exorcist, where you have Max von Sydow and Jason Miller, who were just fantastic in that film, and I just didn't buy that he cared about Reagan at all. And I think that's just my own take on his performance. I did, however, really love Louise Fletcher. Again, most people know her as Nurse Ratched from like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but she's a very gifted actress. And it was nice seeing her play a very caring role in this film. And I thought it kind of filled the gap since Reagan's mother was not in this film at all. Ellen Burstyn not being in this film is a big hole for me. She's such a big part of the original film. But what the actors went through to make that film, I think, contributed to a lot of them that survived what happened in the first film not wanting to come back for this one. I know that was a tough shoot, but her not being in the film, just there's a void there because of it. Even though I think Louise Fletcher does fill the void somewhat, the fact that Chris isn't in it really is a missing key element that made the first film work so well. The big problem for me in this is the identity of what the demon was that possessed Reagan, and the name of the demon is Pazuzu, and it is pretty much a giant grasshopper or a locust. And I thought that just again took away from the dread and the horror that made the first one so unsettling. It's not scary. It comes off as very silly in this film. And I understand that they were trying to go for a more psychological, almost religious, and spiritual film than opposed to the first one, which was very horrific and dreadful in terms of its execution, but it just doesn't work. I do respect that they tried to do something different, that they didn't try to copy the Friedkin original, and they tried to do something different, but it just doesn't work. There are some great elements in this film, though. I do love the fact that they go back to the original locations. There's some cool moments at the end of the film that I really enjoyed. But all in all, it's boring. There's just so much about this film it's just not interesting. Linda Blair does what she can with the role, but it's just the script is just not tight, and it just doesn't work. It's unfortunate because I think everybody tried to bring their A game to this. And I can't just say it's a piece of shit, it sucks, because that's what a lot of people will say about movies like this that just don't work. But it just doesn't work because the script just doesn't work. It just gets lost. It's kind of it's all over the place because you have the Reagan story, and then you have the story with the father doing the investigating and going to Africa and all this stuff. And they don't really tie together very well. So it's kind of all over the place, which is unfortunate. I don't regret owning it. I might give it another watch. It's not the worst film I've ever seen. It is, if I can recall the other two Exorcist films, the fourth films, which are split into two, or they made two versions of the fourth film. It is, of course, the weakest of the Exorcist films. If I had to give this one a rating on my scale, I would probably give this one 2 skulls. Again, there are elements of the film that I do enjoy. I don't think it's a complete waste of time. It's interesting to see where these characters are. You have Reagan and Kitty, seeing where they are after the events of the first film, but it just doesn't work. It just doesn't have the story. Is just not as sharp as what Blatty wrote, and it's just not a good sequel to the masterpiece that is the original Exorcist. It just isn't. It falls flat, and it's boring in spots. It's confusing in spots. It takes away a lot of the mystery and the dread of the original by showing you what the entity was that possessed Reagan. And then it just gets silly and hokey, and there's some parts at the end that just are laughably terrible. They just don't come off very well. And it's unfortunate because when you see certain elements in the film, you're like, oh God, that's awesome, and then it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. It's unfortunate, but not regretting that I own it, not regretting that I watched it, and I'm sure that my sentiments are shared by many people that are going to watch this, because a lot of people do not like this film. In fact, everything I've read said it's one of the worst horror sequels ever made. But yeah, that is my thoughts on Exorcist II: The Heretic. I'm curious what other people think about it. It seems like people are digging this Exorcist, retrospective that I'm doing. So please share your thoughts about The Exorcist 2 in the comments below. Would love to hear from everyone. And everybody can look forward to my next one, which will be The Exorcist 3. So I'm really looking forward to that. Really looking forward to people sharing their thoughts on these videos. Really having a good time doing them. And I want to thank everyone again for watching this. And hope everyone has a great evening. Take it easy. Stay scared.